Hi everyone, welcome to Season 3 and our very first season as Body Peace.
We're so glad you're here as we begin this new chapter.
I'm Jennie Kramer.
And I'm Nina Manolson.
If you've been with us since the beginning, you'll remember we started as Her Story on a Plate, exploring food, bodies, and culture. But no matter the topic, we always came back to the same thing, our relationship with our bodies.
So it made sense to make our name reflect what we were truly talking about, body peace. This is the heart of our work, supporting you in navigating life in a body you may not always like or respect, especially in a culture that's often critical and demanding, and learning how to build a relationship with your body that's kind, respectful, and real.
Each episode brings honest conversations with each other and with our guests about self-image, societal expectations, aging, diet culture, and the deep healing that happens when we come home to ourselves.
You'll hear personal stories and clinical insights that invite you to feel seen, supported, and gently encouraged on your own body peace journey.
We're so glad you've joined us. Welcome to Body Peace.
Today we're going to have a juicy conversation about our sexuality. We have the honor of talking with Dana D'Alessandro about the deep connection between our sexuality and our relationship with our body, how one impacts the other, and how we can cultivate sexual well-being, and so much more. Dana is a certified sex therapist, an educator whose work grew out of her background in oncology support, where she saw firsthand how few places women had to talk openly about sexual health. Since 2013, she's been helping individuals and couples navigate intimacy, desire, and connection through every stage of life. Currently, she works in her private practice and is also the co-founder of the Tufts Integrated Sexual Health Program at Tufts Medical Center, where she brings compassionate, comprehensive care to patients across Massachusetts. Dana, I am so thrilled to have you here. After we met, so Dana and I met because we were both teaching at a women's retreat. And I spoke right before, and then Dana spoke, and I sat there actively taking notes. And I reached out to Jennie, and I was like, Jennie, Dana has to come and talk on our podcast because all women need to hear what you have to say, Dana. It's so, so important. So first, I'm curious, what made you become a sex therapist?
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me on, because I really enjoyed hearing your talk as well, and I found a lot of overlap. So it was really an honor. And Jennie, nice to meet you, and thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. I just want to know why I wasn't at this retreat. But okay.
Yeah,
Next
totally.
one. Okay.
It was great. It was a great retreat. So how I got into it, I worked in women's oncology, which I still work in. And I was working in women's oncology. This was about 12, 13 years ago. And I started a survivorship support group because there wasn't one there. And as part of that, we learned about, things you can control in survivorship. And I noticed that women would sort of be like, of all ages, young, old, breast cancer, GYN cancer, they would be like, has anybody else experienced pain? My desire has really dropped off. And I was starting to hear these kind of recurring themes in survivorship. And so I went back to the University of Michigan, went to their sexual health program out of their School of Social Work. I was a general therapist before, got certified, went through a very rigorous process of supervision. Took me about 2.5, 3 years, and became a certified sex therapist. So I'm an ASEX certified sex therapist. And I have a private practice where I work with men, women, couples. But what I love most is really being in the hospital setting, working with women, either who have had cancer, have cancer, or just in general, are experiencing, whether it's menopause. We have a menopause clinic here up at Tufts, and we are developing actually a general sexual health program here called TISH, which is Tufts Integrated Sexual Health, that is geared at addressing sexual health concerns across the board, men, women. And we're starting in oncology, but we're branching out slowly. And we're also branching out to area hospitals that we partner with.
I'm thinking about, not just cancer, right? But there are a slew of other illnesses that could affect, one's functioning. But also the bigger theme to me is how we see ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. How does body image and whatever we think we're projecting affect our sexual relationships, whatever they may be. I'm wondering, what your experience has been sort of integrating this idea of how body image affects, a sexual relationship or just a sexual identity.
Sure. And one of the things that Nina and I had spoken about after the retreat was this idea of an erotic template and what an erotic template is. And we all have one. Okay. An erotic template is basically your blueprint. It's what makes you up as a sexual person, your preferences, your discomforts, your likes, your level of comfort with your body. And we were talking a little bit before the podcast, it's a little bit shocking how many women I will ask, have you ever looked at your genitals? And a lot of women will say, oh, why would I do that? For men, it's easy. Their genitals are right there. It's hard to miss. Women, it's not. I encourage all women, get a mirror, see what the actual topography is. Much like a penis, all labia look different. There's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong to sexual desire. One of the things that when I work with couples, a lot of times they come in with what we call discrepant desire. One partner has higher desire than the other. And it's not always the man that has the higher desire. I think we stereotypically think that, but it isn't always. And the thing is, we all come at sexuality on the basis of our own experience, how we were raised, our comfort level with our bodies, to your point, and a whole host of other things. And all those things mix together to create our erotic template.
Do you find that one's perception of body size has an impact on their sense of who they are sexually? And it's not even about anyone can be proud and of any body size that they are, and hopefully I hope that's true for everyone.
Right.
Then it's about how they're perceived by another. So if they have a ongoing partner and perhaps their body has changed, how does that affect things? If they are looking for a partner, how does that affect things, no matter what the body size? I'm wondering what your experience has been about this.
Well, on a broader sort of meta level, two of the things that you're talking about, one is this idea of expectation. And I really want to address that because there's obviously external expectations that we all experience, but I think certainly as women, culturally, socially, all kinds of crazy expectations that play into erotic focus. So there's that idea of expectations, both external and internal. And there's this idea of vulnerability. That idea of putting yourself out there. And it's funny, right before I was on this, I was looking at Instagram and there was a young girl, and you know how they film all these oh, I'm going on a date, a blind, a blind date thing. And they're a little sickening, but it was really kind of sad because this very pretty young girl said, I put makeup on. And then she realized afterwards she said, well, that was the shortest date I've ever been on. She said, I met this guy, walked into the restaurant, and he basically said, you know what? Let's go outside. And he said, this isn't going to work. I'm not feeling it. And she said, it's really hard to date when you're fat. And I'm thinking to myself, and the harsh reality is that women are judged very, very harshly. Nina, I said to you, in my practice, I've had women come in, beautiful women of all shapes and sizes, of all ages. And as part of their challenge with feeling sexual and being sexual is this idea that, I've had bilateral mastectomy, or I've gained 20 pounds since menopause, or I've gained 50 pounds since menopause, or since I've had kids, and how that weighs down their ability to feel attractive and feel sexual and sensual.
Well, I mean, look at the meta of that, right? I mean, it has to do with diet culture. It has to do with expectations societally, how we internalize those, how we internalize weight stigma. And really, when I say weight stigma, I mean all sizes, because that same guy could also have said that to a very, very, very skinny girl too. And the fact that he made that judgment in about 30 seconds flat, clearly that's his loss. But that's not how she was feeling it.
Right.
She was feeling completely rejected.
Well, and it's interesting, as a little bit of a segue, I'll tell you a story about a young woman who I worked with in oncology, who was just a lovely, lovely young woman. And she was 23 and she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer and had all kinds, everything removed. Everything that could be removed was removed. And I remember her saying, she was in my survivorship group, and she said, how do I date? How do I go on a date and say to someone, I don't know if I can have intercourse. I know I can't have children. I'm 23 years old. How does now, to her credit, she is a prime example of how if we could get all women to be able to look at their value as not being judged by the exterior. And hers wasn't even her exterior. You couldn't see any of her, what she viewed as loss, right? You couldn't see it, which sometimes makes it a lot harder. But, if women could see and value themselves for the internal, it's hard to fight all the societal stuff. It's historic,
But
right?
one of the things that you said that's so important is the grief and the loss, right? That we're all dealing with because bodies change, because bodies age. And so when you're working with somebody and they're saying, you know what, my body has changed, either I've gained weight or it's looser or it's just not as moist, things are different,
Right.
And they're saying, and, I'm not feeling it.
Mm-hmm.
What are you saying to them?
Well, I think it ties back to that expectation idea. I think we all age. And I will tell you, coming from oncology, we are fortunate to age.
I'll bet.
There's a lot of
I'm so
people
glad
that
you said
get
that.
the opportunity to age. Okay. Now, how you feel about aging, obviously you look at our society, it's an ageist society. So where do women get the positive reinforcement? I think a lot of it has to be internal, the value you feel you are bringing to a relationship, the world, whatever it may be. To get back to your question, the grief and loss thing is really real, because one of the biggest fallacies women are fed is once you hit menopause or perimenopause, your sex life is done. I've had women say, oh, it doesn't matter. In 2 years, I'm going to be 50. I'm done. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. That's absolutely BS. Now, it does get into this idea of, different types of desire, right? You have spontaneous desire and you have reactive desire. As we age anyway, men and women, but primarily women, you really have to shift your expectations about your arousal and about your desire to be less about that sort of spontaneous, ooh, that guy's hot. Now I feel this, or that woman's hot. I feel this spontaneous desire to, oh, wait a minute, this person's really intelligent. I love this person. I'm really attracted to this person. It becomes a much more internal kind of desire. There's a sex therapist whose last name is Basson who did a lovely model that's a circular model of desire rather than sort of Masters and Johnson linear, desire, arousal, orgasm, denouement. It's more of you can leap into arousal cognitively, you can leap into it intellectually. You share a wonderful meal with someone, you feel connected to them. That's going to make you feel desire, right? There's a lot of ties, as we said, between food and sex. But it is this idea of, all of that shifts for everyone.
We're talking about internal negative talk and external negative talk, right? It's very hard to navigate both. I'm wondering how we can help, even some of our listeners, right? Think about, how do I literally allow myself to experience pleasure? Because some would say, well, after all, I allowed myself to experience pleasure in other ways, and look at that. I do too much all the time. What makes me think that I'll be able to, enjoy that too? Like, as if food and sex are somehow mutually exclusive, or, you only get one. That's what I hear a lot.
I think it's sort of like cancer and sex. People will say, well, I survived my cancer. I'm lucky to be alive, so I'm not going to complain about anything else. Why do they have to be mutually exclusive?
Right.
Why can't we acknowledge, of course you're happy to be alive. What else can we do to bring pleasure back into your life? And I do think one thing that people in general mistake is they substitute pleasure for orgasm.
I want you to yellow highlight that. They substitute pleasure for orgasm.
Right.
So say more.
So I think if you ask people in general how they define sex, they will define sex as partnered intercourse, penetrative intercourse, a heteronormative model with orgasm. But it's this idea of at any age, but certainly as we age, orgasm might become more difficult. It might feel different for a variety of reasons, okay? There are a lot of women that have never experienced orgasm. Does that mean that you can't have a pleasurable sexual experience? I argue no. I think that, especially for women, I think for men it's a little bit different, because I think that orgasm is absolutely tied to pleasure for men. And I think men have a difficult time understanding and buying the idea that you can have a pleasurable sexual experience as a woman and you don't have to have an orgasm. Now, don't get me wrong. I want everyone to have an orgasm. I work with a lot of women on learning how to have an orgasm. But if you can't, okay, there's a lot of women that are physically unable to have an orgasm. Does that mean that you should write off sex? Absolutely not. You just have to define pleasure, and pleasure is sex should be a broader term. There's a lot of things incorporated into that. There's a lot of women that have vulvectomies that will never have penetration again. Does that mean that they shouldn't experience, or men that have, erectile issues or prostate cancer, does that mean that they shouldn't have a sexual experience? I would say no, because I think that physical intimacy, however it's defined, and emotional intimacy go hand in hand, and they enhance each other.
Well, you can imagine if somebody's been bullied from, let's say, early childhood, adolescence, whether it's from friends or family, or they just have been told in subtle and direct ways that they are less than, that their bodies are not good enough, whatever that means, whether it's by partners, by the society at large, that it becomes hard to become defiant, not impossible, but hard to become defiant and say, you know what? I love me exactly as I am. And if you want to get to love me, you better love me the way I love me.
Well, and in that is also, and I get to have pleasure, and I get to define what pleasure is for me and what pleasure looks like. And then we get into, Dana, this whole concept that you taught me about, which is the erotic template. What is my idea of what is erotic? And how do I bring that close
Right.
to this body as it is right now?
And most people never think about that. Like, they never think about what feels good for me. And to get back to something you said earlier, Jennie, about expectations and your partner's expectations, we have all these expectations of ourselves, and how we should be in a relationship or how we should be on our own. That self-judgment really works against what you're talking about, which is really saying, wait a minute, what do I like? And, for a lot of women, I think sex as they get older, and not necessarily even as they get older, for many women I've worked with right from the beginning, sex feels like something on a to-do list. It's like, oh, okay, I'm exhausted, and this gets back to erotic focus. I've got a job, I've got bills, I've got my parents, I've got kids, I've got, 85,000 things I have to do in the house. And now I have to be this sexual whatever, right? That expectation that you have of yourself puts pressure on you, and nothing kills libido like pressure, okay? But it's
this is another highlighter moment. Nothing kills libido like pressure. So important to say that, because if you're talking about erotic focus, how do I shift into sensuality? How do I shift into sexuality? And I'm feeling pressured to do it. Well, that's not going to work.
Right. So I will talk to women all the time because, again, women come in and they say, if I never had sex again, I'd be okay. But
I've
I
heard it too.
have a partner that I love. They supported me through my cancer, or just, again, if it's a non-oncology setting, I have a partner who sex is really important to. So I've got to get back to being sexual. It's going to ruin my relationship if I don't. That's a lot of pressure, okay? And what I really try to get women to think about is, look, until there's buy-in from you, until you're in a place where you're able to say, yeah, I want to do this for my partner because that's a good sexual relationship, right? I mean, a mutually respecting relationship where you care about your partner's pleasure, I think, is what everybody strives for if they want a partnered relationship. But it's this idea of what's in it for me? And not to be crass, but it's this idea of, what's going to make it worth my while? What's going to make it worth not sleeping? What do I want? What do I like? And that, again, to get back to your point, Jennie, we can talk about this philosophically, and I talk to women about this all the time. And, we can sit here and make it sound really easy. It's not easy. Communicating even to someone you love or with someone you love about your sexual wants, your sexual needs is difficult. And it gets back to that concept of vulnerability, and you're putting yourself out there and you're saying, hey, I like this. I find this pleasurable. And you're risking someone saying, that's weird, and you get back to judgment.
Two things cross my mind in terms of factors that affect this, right? One is fatigue. I mean, it always takes me back to a lecture I once heard Gloria Steinem give at a conference. And essentially, I'm paraphrasing terribly, but essentially what she said was, listen, I said women could do it all. I didn't say you had to do it all at the same time. So, but that's who we are, right?
Right.
I think fatigue is an element that I'm interested in talking about. And also just this idea of what is the cultural influence on my expectations about pleasure, about fulfilling someone else's needs, or even the cultural pressures of, if I'm in a relationship that my culture wouldn't even approve of, how does that work? I'm wondering if you've come
Well, there's
across.
so many things that you're saying in there, Jenny, right? One is shame, right? One is appetite. Am I allowed to have an appetite? And another one is, am I allowed to receive? I'm exhausted. Do I have to be the giver here?
And, another one is time. You get back time, and again, sexual experience should be broader than just intercourse. Okay. And I really try to encourage men and women to think about that. You may want to have a sexual encounter. Your partner may have had a really long, bad day. Does it have to be a 2-hour sexual extravaganza where we're hanging from the chandeliers? Or can it be, something briefer, more foreplay based? And again, I think for a lot of people, they'll say, well, I really am exhausted, but kind of like once I start kissing my partner, I kind of get into it, and it naturally. I would never advocate for anyone to push themselves to do something they don't want to do. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of times we sort of do an automatic no. And it's this responsive no of, I'm just exhausted, rather than thinking, if it were like a 15-minute kissing thing or touching, yeah, maybe I would enjoy that. Maybe I'd sleep better. Maybe, what would the value be for me?
Right. Can I have an appetizer? Does it always have to be a main course?
Correct. Exactly. Another great
Thank you for the
analogy.
food metaphor. Appreciate
I
that.
love food metaphors.
Well, that's true. And again, are you going to forego one just because you can't have the 7-course meal? And I think that's a very individual decision. I think most people's expectations don't allow for that. So one of the things I do like women to really think about is that idea. Number one, what's in it for me? What do I enjoy about this? And that gets back to that idea of erotic template, really sort of figuring out for yourself what feels good. And that's going to be very different when you're 50 than it was when you were 20 or 30.
Okay, wait, another yellow highlighter moment. Our erotic template changes.
Sure.
What it was when we were 20 is not what it's going to be when you're 50. And so taking the time to discover what is sensual, what does sensuality look like for me now? What is sexuality? What's erotic to me? What turns me on at this age and stage? And I think that there's something also baked into things you said, Dana, which is not writing ourselves off.
I think it's important to seek out medical care when you think you need it. In other words, I'm here to say that I think sex gets better as you get older. And I very much acknowledge that there are those who have some difficulties, whether it's because of dryness, whether it's because of, hormonal imbalances, whatever may be happening. And so it's sometimes hard to go into a doctor's office and say, but I'm assuming this just par for the course and I just have to live with it. No, you don't have to live with anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right. And Jenny, I want to say just from my own experience, because I have shared that I have the BRCA gene and I had a double mastectomy, and in all of those surgeries that went around it, I went into instant menopause in my early 40s and my libido tanked. And I went around asking people, so what do you think? And they were like, yeah, it happens. I was like, are you kidding me? My kids are just sleeping through the night. No, absolutely no. I kept having to ask and ask and ask. And finally, somebody said, we have a sex therapist with our oncology team. You talk to her. And she was the one that said, here's how you reclaim, and now I have the words for it, your erotic template. And the way that I had described it to her is, I said, I went into her and I said, I used to be able to get on a train and I'd go to this stop and then this stop and this stop. And then I was at the terminal and I was like, now I get on the train, that stop has been blown up. That one has been completely decimated. There's no terminal in sight. And she basically, in her own way, was, and I so appreciate these words, you need to find your own erotic template all over again. And one thing, Dana, I want to go back to is this idea of how do we, so suppose we have an erotic template. We know it turns us on, but life is too busy and we're exhausted. And we want to focus. We want that erotic focus. How do you recommend that women do that shift to, oh yeah, I do not have pleasure right now?
The first thing I want to talk about, and I want to answer that, but you mentioned something really important, and that is, the postmenopausal or the perimenopausal, and certainly in your situation being dropped off that menopause cliff, the dryness and the pain. Because I think that a lot of women come in, certainly into TISH, our Tufts Integrated Sexual Health Program, and the big three is low libido, pain with penetration, and vaginal dryness. Okay. Now, if you look at anything that's causing your body physical discomfort, your body is naturally going to rail against that. And we talked about this a little with reference to if you have a history of abuse or if you have a history of sexual trauma, your body remembers, Bessel van der Kolk, your body keeps the score, right? Your body remembers pain. Pain is overriding. Your body's going to be like, and you're going to kind of do the clenching and, everything's going to tighten up. And I think this is, what you and I were talking about this idea of moisturizing every day, paying attention to the things that increase your comfort. Actually, absolutely, Jennie, to your point, if you're experiencing pain, see a doctor, see your OBGYN. If they're not addressing the pain, see another one, because the pain, there are tools called vaginal dilators. There's a lot of things out there that can help with pain, okay? Talk to a sex therapist, call me, whatever. But, those are things that can be addressed. And once those things are removed, that libido generally comes up. There was an article years ago that I've got to find the reference for. I think it was in Psychology Today. They did a study that said for women, their partner's scent was more important than their per capita income. Women will verify that. Now, I don't know if men have the same mechanism, but for women, scent is really important. Although I've heard men say, "Oh, I love it when my partner comes back from a run. It's a really sexy smell." And women are like, "Oh, I need to get in the shower."
Are we back to pheromones? Remember the pheromones
Pheromones,
conversation of many years ago?
exactly. But I think things like that's different for everyone. And to your point about the changes and the mastectomy piece, your genitals are easy, male and female genital. Those are the easy go-tos. But your whole body's really an erogenous zone. And, like some people say, "Oh, I love to have my neck kissed and nuzzled." Other people like, "Stay away from my neck. I like to have my ears blown. I like to have my thighs caressed." What works for you? What do you find erotic? And you can have a lot of fun. If you go to a sex therapist, they'll talk to you about things like sensate focus and doing things that really explore touch and expanding your palette for where you want to be touched, how you want to be touched. Do you like light touch? Do you like more forceful touch? That's all worth experimenting with. And whether you're partnered or not, in the shower, I'll say to people, like when you're washing your body, what feels good? What do you like?
That's so important what you said, is whether you're partnered or not, right? We can reclaim our sensuality. We can reclaim pleasure in our body, whether we have a partner or not.
And I'll tell you a trick, okay? Actually, you have a benefit if you're not partnered, in the sense of, if you think about, for people who masturbate, and I absolutely encourage women to masturbate because I think that's a really wonderful
Partnered or
thing.
otherwise, yeah.
I'm talking about unpartnered, okay? But certainly partnered or otherwise. But, if you're unpartnered, masturbating gives you a wonderful way for both. You're right, partnered or not, to know what works for you, okay? What gets me to orgasm. But the thing you want to pay attention to is what you're thinking about when you're masturbating. And I will ask this question across the board. I'll say, what do you think about when you masturbate? What you're doing is you're staying steeped in the sensual. You're either looking at something, or you're imagining something, or you're reading something, or you're just thinking about, "Oh, this feels really good. This is getting me to where I want to go." Okay, take that example and then compare it, and you'll laugh. Then compare it to your thought process in a partnered sexual experience, which is like, do I look okay? Is he or she going to think that I'm doing this right? All these pressures start to come in. And oh God, now I got to worry about an orgasm. All these pressures play in that don't play in with masturbation. So I'll tell people that. I'll say, compare how you're thinking about yourself and what you're focusing on with masturbation versus when you're with someone else. It's a very, very different thought process. And really, you want to use the masturbation example as what you want that erotic focus to be.
I think one of the takeaways here is that none of this is linear. And so there are people, all genders, all sexes, at every age that have struggles. I certainly know Nina and I have worked with lots and lots of folks who, they haven't mastered it, or whatever they think is mastering it, for decades. So it's not like I had it and now I don't have it. For some, it's like I've never had it. I don't even know what it is. Do I even want it? So there has to be some gentle exploration. I love this idea of, focusing on, sensate, experiences. And I think it's also important for us to say that there are sexual partnerships of all kinds. I think one of the most interesting things that has come across my practice is, lesbian women who are sort of both going through some level of menopause or perimenopause together. And they look at each other like, oh my God, I think we're done.
Right.
And so there's a lot of work to do there as well.
Right. Oh, I agree. And, and again, I think it's really important that when we talk about sex, we do tend to talk in a heteronormative way, but sexual pleasure isn't limited to any one type of anything, right? Any type of partnership, whether you're partnered or not, everybody has a right to enjoy sexual pleasure.
I'll say one final thing too, if I may, which is there are more and more and more and more women going through fertility treatments. And the age range of that has now also shifted. So you're really talking in general terms about someone anywhere between 25 and 45. They have to come up with a better name. I hate that they call it geriatric pregnancy.
Oh, I know.
That's
Isn't
for
that
another
awful?
day.
Yeah.
Right. But the point is that there is this association that gets made, which is if I am unable to get pregnant on my own, I am deficient. Yes, I'm going to do everything I have to if I have the financial means to do so. But by the way, in the background is I am deficient. And then they become pregnant, hopefully, and they have a child or more, hopefully, often twins. And then they're left with this notion about this body that actually failed them.
I work with a lot of couples that go through this, and what that does to body image is certainly part of what you outlined, but even what it does to sex, it makes sex a very task-oriented thing, which I work with a lot of couples that are trying to recover and get back to being sexual as pleasure, not as task-oriented.
Well, you know what that means? We're going to have you back.
Oh,
We have so much more to talk about.
We do. We have so much to talk about. And Dana, before you go, I was committed to having you share what I consider your public service announcement. And you gave a mention of it, but I want you to be very specific because I think it really, really is important. You said we need to moisturize. What exactly does that mean?
So I think that this is something that is so impactful for women. And I've gotten to a point where I talk about this when I go to a needlepoint retreat. I mean, whenever there's a group of women, I'll mention it because it's such a small thing and it's so easy and it can be so impactful for vaginal comfort. This has really got to do with taking care of your body, less than, sex related. But it is daily moisturizing of your labia. Or, even if you are comfortable going a little bit inside the entrance of the vagina, vitamin E oil, any organic oil. Tish, we really try to steer people more toward the organic oils than like a Replens or something like that. We like, and people feel comfortable with, I think, more the organic oils. But moisturizing those tissues, you moisturize your eyelids, you moisturize your hands, you moisturize your face. If you think about the tissues of your genitals, they're very delicate. Age, they get dry. And when they're dry, you don't get good blood flow to those tissues and they don't stay as healthy. So really the goal is keep those tissues moist so that you get good blood flow. And they stay more plump, they stay healthier, and they're more likely, we can go into the whole biology of arousal, which is also very important. But you need arousal, you need foreplay, you need moisture to really elongate the vagina and make penetration more comfortable. So that all plays into just good genital health.
And I'll just say for skin or labia or otherwise that we must hydrate. Women tend not to drink water.
Exactly.
They're afraid it's going to bloat them.
Right.
They think drinking soda is water. They think iced tea is water. It is not. It's so important to hydrate.
No, and you're right. It hydrates, it hydrates everything. As a runner, believe me, I've run races where I've been dehydrated. It is no fun, but you never think of your labia as being a victim of dehydration. But, you get dry lips. Those vaginal tissues are delicate, just like your eyelids. So they're worth moisturizing. And
I can't think of anything else we should be left with at the end of the podcast than making sure we moisturize the labia. So we're all grateful. That's all we can say.
Oh my gosh, Dana, thank you so much for being.
Thank you, guys. I know
fun.
there's so much, and
I know.
if anybody has any questions or you guys have questions, don't hesitate to contact me.
How do people reach you?
They can reach me they can email me, certainly at, I can send it to you, but it's dana.d'alessandro
We'll
at
put it in the show notes for sure.
.org. I have a private practice, but certainly I think Tish, the Tufts Integrated Sexual Health Program, is a great place for people to start.
And I think you're on social media, aren't you?
I'm very narrow. I'm not on Facebook. Psychology Today, you may be able to get me, but my private practice is small. Okay.
Well, it's
Thank
like
you.
Thank you both.
Thank you. We're so glad you joined us on this episode of Body Peace.
Stay connected as we continue exploring what it means to live in your body with more ease, trust, and care by subscribing to Body Peace on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen.
Be sure to visit us at bodypeacepodcast.com for special bonus content for those on our mailing list.